Hey everybody, welcome to Friday's lunchtime edition of the Code Contemporary office hours. My name is Brian Robinson. Hopefully we've got some questions today, and if not, I've got some live coding I'm going to do working on my personal site, working through getting some ad space set up for Hey James, how's it going? I can't hear you, but I can see you. Hopefully getting that ad space that we started working on Wednesday fully up and running on the site, so that I don't have to worry about the issues with pop-ups from MailChimp. So I can actually link out directly and hopefully have it set up in a way that in Jekyll I can just add front matter to any blog post and get a nice ad space. So that's what we're going to be working on if no one has any questions today. But as always, I want to make sure that I'm really full and clear here. I'm here for your questions, so definitely fire them off in chat, and if they're bigger than that, then we can talk about what needs to happen to get those questions answered. So unless there are any questions, I'm going to go ahead and get started and switch over to viewing my screen. As you can see, I've got my site up. I've also got the design up that we worked on Wednesday this week. The basic thing would be this promo space, that gradient background, and the space. James has a question. Oh, he's teeing me up for a basic SEO question. I like it. How do you add Google Analytics to your site? That is a great question. It's something that a lot of people might not have gone through, and I would highly encourage everyone who has a website to have analytics on it, as long as you don't mind the fact that you're technically tracking your users at that point. Oh, good. Well, I'm happy to help, James. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my analytics account. And what we're basically going to end up doing... Oh, yep. Google insisted I change my primary email address over. So let's jump over there. What we're going to end up doing is coming into our Google Analytics account, going to the property and the site, right? So technically I've got all of these analytics accounts over here. I set some of these up very improperly way back in the day. I've got this one main account now, though, that has multiple properties inside of it. My personal site, which houses my blog, and the Code Contemporary site, codecontemporary.com. We'll take brianlrobinson.com as our example here. And then you can actually go inside that property, which I'm already in over here, and we're going to come down to the admin area, which is on the left-hand side of the screen. And you have all these settings, and they're not the easiest things to get around, but let's take a look. They change where this is located every once in a while. So inside of the property area, so it goes account level, so that's that brianlrobinson.com account. And then there are the multiple properties, and you can switch between those here as well. The property is the analytics code that we're going to be grabbing and putting on our site. So in this middle column, I'm going to go to tracking code. And the easy answer is you literally take this script that Google provides you, and you place it on your site where it tells you to. It used to be that they recommended putting it at the bottom of every page. Now they recommend putting it at the end of the head of each page. So that's the long and short of it. You're just going to take this code, copy it, find your header wherever that may be. For me on this Jekyll site, it's in header.html, and you're going to paste it in near the end of your head. I've got a little specialized thing here. This is actually Google Tag Manager, which is a little bit more advanced than your standard Google Analytics installation. Most people don't need it, and in fairness, I really don't need it, but I had some stuff that I was working on at my last agency that I needed to understand Google Tag Manager a little bit more, and so I played around on my site to get that understanding. So it could very easily, instead of being that Tag Manager code, just be that Google Analytics code that we just grabbed, and it's going to grab that in, paste, and deal with it from there. Does that answer your question, James? The main thing is it's adding it in there, and then you've got this UA number down here. That's actually your property's specific analytics ID. That's the main thing. That if you want to just grab this code, you can actually just copy and paste that information out and be good to go. So James is saying he was also confused about tags and didn't know if he needed that. The tag manager stuff is really interesting. It allows for a lot of control over what you're tracking, as opposed to tag manager just getting your basic page views and all that sort of thing. Tag manager lets you set up custom events without writing JavaScript on your site. It's really, really good for working with a marketing team. You get to put the tag manager code in there, and then they get to execute some really sandboxed code on the site to track stuff. Let's see, I might be experiencing some internet issues. Hopefully that doesn't bring the stream down in any significant way. So yeah, so that's setting up analytics. So yeah, unless there are any other questions, I'll start working on that promo space a little bit again. Any other questions? Cool. We are going to be adding a promo space to individual blog posts. And in this case, I'm going to set up some basic HTML just to keep it kind of in keeping with this this design. I'm going to go ahead and put it on that blog post that is specified in the design just so we can start playing with it. So I'm going to switch over to starting my new journey with Code Contemporary. And according to the design, we're going to place it here before the first heading. So I'm going to come in, close out the header. What we did last time was actually set up a mixin to use that gradient border, so we didn't have to write that code again, and we're going to utilize that here in a little bit. But first I'm going to write some HTML to get on the page what we need. So I'm going to come over into my posts, and I'm going to open that post up. And this is all Jekyll, which comes as Markdown, but the cool thing about Markdown is that in theory, you can write HTML, you can write liquid template tags all inside of your post. So we're going to just start with basic HTML to get our design up and running. And then I do want to refactor it out into an include that I pass data from the front matter into. But first, we just need to have a div, class equals article, add space, and then inside of that we're going to have, I think we specified over here, we've got, where's the design? Looks like we've got an image, we've got a headline, we've got some text over here on the right, some description text, and a button. So we're going to come in here, we're going to say, all right, we need an image. We don't have that image yet, but we'll get it. We've got, I'm going to call it an H3 because it needs to be a little bit less important than other stuff. This will be the text we've got here. And I swear I did this, but it's not in any of my repositories, so we're just going to do it over again. Hope everyone's okay with that. We've got a paragraph tag. We'll grab that copy again, so we've got it. And then we've got an anchor with an href and a class, so it'll turn into a button. And what do we say? Sign up now. Sign up now. Just close that anchor. So we've got one big div containing all of our elements, and then we're actually going to attach some classes in here if we need them for various positioning and that sort of thing. So this will be, I tend to use beam syntax, so it'll be article, add space, underscore, underscore, image, and we'll copy that so it's a little bit easier on us. Class equals this, and this will be headline. This will be our description. And down here, we already have a button, but we're going to make it article, add space, underscore, underscore, button. All right. So in theory, if we've done this correctly, after our site recompiles in Jekyll, we will have the HTML that we're looking for here. So this isn't exactly what we were looking for in our design. So obviously we are going to need to go in and write some styles around it. First and foremost, I'm going to go and I'm going to create a new SAS file. And we'll put this in my components. Oh, look, I already have ad space. Cool. I already have a SAS file created. I must have done some of this work on Wednesday, but you know, that happens. And I'm going to go ahead and refactor those classes to be the class I've already set up. So instead of add space, I think I just said, yeah, just add space. And this will be add space image, add space headline, add space description, and add space button. So that's all refactored. And you can see already we're getting that gradient border just by the simple act of, in our CSS, we've got the class called out, and then we've got that gradient border added in. And then this margin here is basically the paragraph margin to put beneath on a paragraph page. And so if anyone didn't get what we did on Wednesday, this is a mix-in in SAS. I actually wrote an article about it. If you go to my blog, brianlrobinson.com, refactoring CSS into a SAS mix-in, I actually wrote Wednesday afternoon based on what the work that I did live streaming on Wednesday. So you can come here, get all the information on refactoring literally that border into a SAS mix-in. So come back over here. Here's that promotional space. And now we need to style up the inside of this. And honestly, I'm okay with this kind of stacked look overall. So I'm going to leave it as this if the browsers that we're working in don't support CSS Grid. And so I'm going to use Grid to actually lay this out in the pattern that I want it. I'm kind of a Grid junkie. So we're going to go ahead and say this is a display grid element. And we're going to specify in terms of the way we're thinking about this design. It's a 2-column grid. And I'm actually going to set it up in 3 rows so that I don't have to set a left-hand side div and a right-hand side div. So if I set it up with 3 rows, it'll automatically deal with the layout that we kind of want. So I'm going to say grid template columns. I'm going to say we probably want to specify a hard width on that left one. So I'm going to say it's probably, call it 200 pixels. And then we're going to specify 1FR. So what this is doing is it's taking the image that we have, specifying the width of that first column to be about 200 pixels wide, and then allowing the right-hand column, the second column, to be 1 fraction of the remaining space. So it basically takes up the rest of the space that we've got. And then I don't actually have to specify any rows right now. I'm actually going to use the rows by building them into our placement of the items. But as you can see, if I refresh the page, we now have it set up into 2 columns, and the content automatically flows into those columns and creates new rows. So we have image, we have headline into 2 columns across the first row, and then we've got a second row that is those next 2 items. So in the end, this is not what we want it to look like. We're actually going to specify that we want the add space image, and this is a SAS syntax, so you can see the ampersand actually comes and reads this class up here, the selector up here, and this amounts to add space image. There's mixed feelings on this sort of nested selector situation in SAS. I'm for the most part pro. The biggest downside is it makes your code a little less findable in your own code base, but for the most part, I haven't run into too many issues dealing with that. I'm actually going to specify that this is going to take up grid row span 3. So I'm actually going to say I want this to span 3 rows, which should give me roughly what I want if it reloads. Application. not what I expected to happen. Let's find out what's going wrong here. Oh, there we go. It finally kicked in. It was probably my service worker again. So you can see this broken image takes up the full width, the full 3 columns, and then we have 3 rows on the right-hand side in that second column. So theoretically, this may be all we need to do. And I'm going to go grab that image. I'm going to put it into my project in my images folder. I could use an SVG for this, but I'm going to use this PNG that I grabbed out of the design. We'll call this CC logo. And now in our HTML, we'll come in and we will give that image a source. This is in my images, cc logo.png. All right, there's the image, and as you can see, it is butted right up against that text, so not ideal for what we're talking about here. So we're going to add a grid gap. And the great thing about grid gap is it's automatically going to handle internal margins and not add any margins to the outside. So I'm going to come to my grid definition up here, and I'm going to say grid gap. I'm going to specify, I don't know, 1 rem, which I think is 18 pixels on my site, although it's a variable font size. And refresh the page. We see that it's broken somehow. Why is it broken? Because my service worker. There we go. So now when we inspect our grid, you can see inside of DevTools that actually adds that spacing in there. And I'm actually going to open this up in Firefox. If y'all haven't used the Firefox DevTools for grid, they're pretty amazing. So I'm going to open this up. They also have probably some service worker stuff happening. There we go. And I can actually come over to the layout panel in the styles and actually find all the grids that I have on this page, which, as it turns out, this page is actually constructed from a lot of grids. And I'm going to turn on the inspector for that grid, and we'll change the color to, I don't know, that's fine. There's the pop-up that, that we're looking to replace. And so now you can actually see the way that the grid is laid out on the page, including those gaps. Yeah, so James brings up the point that the actual in SAS, that ampersand does actually replace. It doesn't replace. It takes whatever it's inside of and brings it down. So the ampersand is replaced by whatever selector it's inside of, or whatever text it's inside of, really. So what this actually compiles down to, and I don't know if I'm minifying right now. Let's take a look. .css. There we go. I'm minifying, but add space. We'll take a look over here. So here's all of that, and we're going to say add space underscore underscore, and you can see here it is in the code, add space underscore underscore image as the compiled code. It works, and this is really what Beam syntax was made for, was to be able to use nested inside of SAS. Like I said, it makes it a little less findable. I can't come into my code and say, oh, there's an issue, you know, with what was it called? Add space underscore underscore image. If I were to grab this entire selector and do a find in my project, the only place it's going to pull that up is on my HTML, not actually in my SAS. So I have to know to segment my search criteria based on the fact that I'm using that syntax. So let's see. So yeah, so you might notice there is a little bit of spacing concern here. The right-hand side is spaced out maybe a little more than we'd like. We can probably handle this in one of a few ways. We can, actually there's margin on the headline, which I don't really want, but that's neither here nor there. We can tell our various grid spaces how to behave, and we can actually bring this practical CSS Grid headline down on the right hand side, but and maybe bring this one centered. Like we could actually position that. I'm gonna go ahead and on my headline remove that margin, because we don't need margins in Grid. So this is a margin bottom, and from our paragraph as well, so ampersand underscore underscore description, margin bottom 0, and we wait for a second for compilation, and let's see what we got. Okay, that's gone. So now we just have to worry about the fact that things are being evenly split in our rows. Let's see, James saying, just out, but thought I'd write it. Yeah, that's the great thing about Sass and Beam, is that it really it's all about the ergonomics of it at that point, because Beam is terrible if you're not using Sass. Like, the ergonomics are just awful. It's way too much typing. So we're going to come in here, and I'm going to try to specify grid auto rows, to specify a few different values and see if any of them are going to be what we want. No. So if we specify min max and we say min content and then auto, yeah, no bueno. Why does that H3 have margin on it again? Margin bottom. Let's see. Yeah. We can, however, come in here and we can say justify align self and why are you making a liar out of me? Because the margin's back. Why does the margin keep coming back? That's nuts. Let's go ahead and add it in here. Align self and see, this margin is not being overridden, and it's because okay, one of the other places that the actual spacing is coming from is that grid gap, and that's partially because I specified just grid gap and not grid column or grid row gap. So depending on what I was thinking for our design here, which let's zoom back into that, we didn't really want that much space, and so we can actually specify, and I'm gonna have to look up the syntax on this, to have the grid gap for the rows be different from the grid gap for the columns. And I don't remember which one comes first, so we're going to look it up real fast. It's row gap first. And so what we're going to specify in our grid gap is going to stay at that one rem. So if my service worker doesn't get in the way, we now have a tighter look here. Okay, James doesn't 100% know what a service worker is. So a service worker is actually another thread of JavaScript in the browser, and you install it into the user's browser. And so if we come over to, I'm not going to do a great job describing this. I have one set up. I read a book by, I'll find it and I'll get his name. I've lost it now. One of the founders of the web wrote an Understanding Service Workers book, and I took a lot of the code directly from that. But it's in the application panel over here, and basically it allows you to cache content in a user's browser. So for mine, let's see if I can find it. I have 3 layers of cache. When you hit my website, I install a service worker in your browser. It's sandbox. There's only so much that I can do in that. And it allows me to store my static assets so that the next time you come, it's a much quicker page load. So all the images on this page end up getting stored in that for me, as well as the CSS, as well as my JavaScript, so that the next time you hit it, you're not having to load all those from my server. You're actually loading them from your own browser. So it's just another layer of caching. It's a local layer of caching on that. But you can see I cache in some static HTML pages, but here's that CSS file that I'm caching, prism.js. I actually don't have any personal JavaScript on this site. It's all CSS driven for the most part, but Prism does my syntax highlighting. Images are stored as well in this cache. And then various pages that you visit, their HTML gets stored in here as well. So this allows for a much quicker page load for a lot of my pages, especially on subsequent views. It also has some really good stuff you can do around PWAs and that sort of thing. But you register it, and you can see I do have this cache here, which is my static cache, and I do need to invalidate that when I publish new CSS to my site. Basically come in and I make it a different version number in the end to kind of purge that. I'm sure there's a better way of doing it. It was Jeremy Keith, I think, service workers. He's a Dactyo, but I started working from this blog post of the minimum viable service worker. He actually has a script that he uses on his site for it. And then I bought his book when it came out earlier this year. Let's see if it's on here somewhere. Going Offline. Yeah, so it's a book called Going Offline. Is an article about going offline, not the actual book itself. Let's get there. It's a book apart book. It's relatively cheap for the Kindle version. It's $11. I read it pretty quick. It's not a long read. It kind of talks about the various things as well as refining and doing some tidying up. I have not implemented tidying up on my site yet. So if I store it in your browser, I can just keep storing it in your browser right now. So yeah, service workers in a nutshell. There's also coming out soon, Workies, I think. Dave Getsky on Twitter was hired by Google, or at least given a stipend by Google, to create a mastery game for service workers. And so soon that's going to come out. It's going to be free thanks to Google. His mastery games are actually usually pretty expensive. He's got one on Flexbox, and he's got one on CSS Grid as well. And they do tend to run about $230. And so Google has offset that cost for us. So if you're curious about using service workers, this will be a mastery game to teach you all the basic concepts. So yeah, the issue that I've been having is that while I'm working on it, unless I've got my panel open, and I don't have that set up in Firefox to work correctly at this point, it doesn't update the CSS for me. It doesn't go around the service worker, which is actually a setting that you can have up here so that everything uploads on reload, and you can actually set it up so that it bypasses on network, which allows for, when this is open, getting the latest version of everything. So you can see now we don't have those gaps, and if we come back over to our elements and inspect, you can see the gaps are completely collapsed on my rows, and they still exist on my columns. I am interested to look at why that's happening. Anyway, okay, sorry, I'm not used to using Chrome's DevTools for grid. This is actually showing the two overlapping grids at the same time, which isn't the easiest thing to look at. But this is technically, the ad space is a child on my article grid layout, and then inside of the ad space, it has its own grid. I was worried that my image was actually sneaking out of its column, but it's not. So we'll come in here and we'll take a look at this, and we'll see that we still have this space here, and if I had to guess, that's a culprit of padding. No, it's just the way this is positioned in here. So we can also align this one, align self, make that center, and we'll get much closer to what we're looking for, and we're gonna let grid take care of the rest for us. So we actually get kind of this centered layout on the right hand side, and we lose the margins. I might actually set up a small gap so that when we get down to small sizes, we get what we're looking for, and we're going to definitely have to have a breakpoint on this. So let's take a look at that real fast. So James asked about Chrome's DevTools for Grid. They are not as fully featured as Firefox is, but they have implemented some visualization of it. So you can see when I hover over these items, so I'll hover over a child element of my ad space grid, and on the actual visual display of it, you can see the lines of my ad space grid. And you can see it when I hover over any of these things. So yeah, it is there. It's just not quite as robust as what Chrome allows for. Chrome visualizes things a little bit better, Firefox visualizes things a little bit better and allows for, you can display the line numbers on it, which is super helpful. Display the area names if you had area names. You get this visualizer down here, so you can actually see how the space is distributed, and it highlights up in the visual area. So it's just a little bit more robust, and they're really doing a lot of work in it. It's one of the areas that are really trying to differentiate themselves from Chrome in. So yeah, and unfortunately, of course, I've got service worker issues over here that I haven't really dealt with. They're working now, but so yeah, Chrome it's definitely comparable. It's just not strong. All right, so I'm going to come back in, and I'm going to specify some gap in my grid rows, and so I'm going to make it 0.5 rem. I'm going to make it about half the space. Yeah, that's a little bit better. And then we're also going to make this button down here an actual button style, which I actually interestingly don't have on the site. For the most part, I've just let links be links across the board and all of that. Oops. Let's see. So we're going to come in, add space button, and we're going to display inline block because it's an anchor, and anchors are span. And we're going to come in, we're going to set a background color, and I don't have my add-on for code set up on this, so I'm going to have to go to my colors SAS file and grab the color name that I want, which is my accent color. We'll come back over here to our CSS and call that variable there. And then we'll want our text color to be our white, and let's see what that gets us. All right, partway there, although I'm a little, and then we're gonna come in and we're gonna say, all right, we want this to be text align center. And so we can handle vertical spacing in one of a couple ways. Right now, this is technically inside of a grid, and so it by default is trying to stretch its vertical alignment. And so we can actually solve that with an align self like we've done the other ones, and we'll say start. So we'll come in here, we'll put here align self start, and then we're going to add some padding to take care of our spacing. So we're going to say 0.5 rem top and bottom, and 1 rem left and right. So now we have a full width button here, and you might have noticed I used inline block instead of block, and you might have expected that to take up only as much room as our padding plus our text. But with grid, it's automatically going to justify to the full width. I think this is live in most. Justify self start. Justify self start is going to get us the same functionality as align self. It's not fully cross-browser compatible, but the nice thing is, no worries, James. Thanks for tuning in. Justify self, if it fails, it's just going to be a full width button, and honestly, it didn't look bad. So I'm perfectly content with falling back to that. But I don't want it to be too big in most browsers when it's the full width of the area. So we'll start with that. So we'll say by align self justify self start as well. Open up DevTools again because service workers, and so now you can see that. I do want my padding to be a little bit bigger left and right. Let's make that, let's see, 3 rem. And I'm also going to adjust my font size. I think that font size is too big for a button. Font size will go down to 0.8 rem. And we'll want to do a hover state on this because that is not an ideal hover state. So we will nest as well. And we're going to say our links on the site are going to have a hover state for the color. And then I'm going to say I want your background color. We'll probably have it switch to our brand color, which has been this blue. At some point I'll probably refactor this to be on that kind of green blue gradient that I've been using a little bit more around. Save that in, and then we get this kind of harsh jump, and we will attach a transition to our background color. We'll set it to 0.3 seconds, ease out. We get a nice little fade, and what ease out does is it actually it makes the fastest piece of the interaction the beginning part, and so that way you get instant gratification of something happening, and then it slows that interaction down at the end. It eases the interaction out. All right, so now we have a working promotional space here, and we do still want to look mobile and see how we're doing responsively. Come on. So we'll keep sizing it down, see if it ever gets to a point. What we're going to want to do is use an FR value over on our image to allow for the image to shrink. It definitely gets pretty tight in there. So on our grid, instead of 200 pixels, we're actually going to set this to maybe 0.33 FR, so a third of the fractional space. Let's see what we get at wider monitors. Come on, DevTools. There we go. So this is pretty close to where we were. Let's take a look at that image, and right now let's take a look at saying align self center, which isn't going to be important at this size, but as we size it down, it's going to center it in that left hand space. And then I could pop this into a different layout, but we do get a full width layout at mobile. I still probably want to go ahead and change our layout at our breakpoint. We're looking probably at maybe change it around 768 and kind of see what happens there. So all we're going to need to do to change this, we're going to have to maybe tweak a few pieces, but we're going to come in, we're going to set up our media query inside of our SAS. We're going to say at media max width 768. Specify a new, probably won't even keep it as a grid. We'll probably change it down to a block level element. That way everything will just stack automatically. So we'll say display block and see what that gets us. It gets us some huge stuff that we probably don't want. Not entirely what we're looking for. As you can see, like this grid row no longer has any effect because we actually took out the grid context of add space. So we're going to come in and we're going to set a height on this image. Max height, call it 300 pixels. margin. All right, so I've changed my mind. I do think that we probably do want to end up going with grid at this point for our mobile, just so we can handle our horizontal alignment a little bit easier. So instead of this, we're going to leave it as grid, so we don't need to override that anymore. And we're going to set our grid template columns just to 1FR, and this will override what's happening on the desktop. And we go back to that, and we're going to also set same breakpoint for our image. We're going to say, all right, we want your max height to be 300 pixels. And we want you to, I think, let's see, a little big for my taste, so we're going to bring it down. We'll do it in rems now, because rems will actually be dynamic sizing on my site. Let's do a little math. Let's say it's 150 pixel, let's say 200 pixels divided by my rem size is 18. So we're looking at about 10 or 11 rem. So that's smaller, and then as we size down, it'll actually keep shrinking because that font size is a dynamic font size. It's a VW based font size, although it's not hugely VW, just a little. I keep pointing myself not to the camera. I need to point here. So we also, I'm thinking, want to allow for our button to be full width at this size. So all we'll need to do on this is allow for the align self to go from start to stretch. So let's try that. Oops, I clicked the link. Excellent. That's super helpful, Chrome DevTools. Thank you. So at our breakpoint, we will align self stretch. No change. Oh, sorry, that's wrong property. Justify self. There we go. There we are. And so now we have this little promotional space that, while it still kind of interrupts the flow of your reading, is probably less annoying than dealing with a pop-up. And this allows for me to turn it kind of on and off. And so at this point, I'm also going to set it up as a hopefully a reusable component in my Jekyll site. I'm going to make an include out of it that's expecting some variables. And then I'm going to pass those variables into the include when I'm looking for it. I've never actually done this in Jekyll. I've used some other templating languages that allow for this, and I did a little bit of reading this morning, and it should work. We'll see. All right, so let's go ahead and commit our styles. Git commit styles promotional space adds to first blog post. All right. Cool. All right. So next up, we're going to come into our Jekyll files. So we're going to leave the comfortable confines of just static HTML, and we're going to define all of this inside of an include. So I'm going to come to my includes, and I'm going to say new file, call add space.html, and then reformat everything. So I decided to pick up some extra white space here that I don't want, and there we go. So now all I should have to do, just to keep it exactly as it was, is include this add space as an include right here. So gotta remember my syntax. All right, so it's just going to be an expression, and it is include the file name. So in this point, it's add space.html. Theoretically, that gets us what we're looking for. Let's take a look. Yeah, cool. All right. So next up, we are going to turn off our notifications for right now, for the next few minutes. Do not disturb. That didn't work. All right. And we're going to change all these over to HTML. So we need to define variables for each of these elements. And we're going to do that in the front matter of our post. And I think I'm going to try out, I need YAML object syntax, because I am not great at it. Okay, so theoretically we've got a, we'll call this add space, and inside that we've got a image, which is that. We have a headline, which is this. We have a description, which is a paragraph. And we have a link location and link text. So we're going to say link text, sign up now, link location, let's call it link URL. For right now, we'll leave it as, let's take it to slash for now. So in theory, and again, this is all kind of theory, I've never actually implemented this, we should be able to say page.add space dot image source, and I actually have to pass this in if I remember correctly. So we're going to, in our include, pass in image source, and let's see, did I still have that up? Jekyll, we want this to be page dot add space dot image. And in theory, I'm actually going to cancel my gulp script and change this back to serving from Jekyll, so we can get our errors. My gulp script doesn't actually throw the Jekyll errors. So we had an error. That's a strong start. But we also do not have an image. It is unknown. So we will double check that everything is named correctly. And we're just going to throw this on the page and see if that's the right variable. Image equals that. No. So let's take a look at those values. Page dot something. Okay, so let's take a look at page dot add space. Okay. Add space has image. Trying to read that. This size is ridiculous. Why would I do that? So I have formatted something improperly up here. Let's call it Jekyll front matter object. It doesn't actually matter to format this way. I could set it up in maybe an easier way to look at, but from matter, let's see if the official Jekyll docs has anything. No. So we will go to this. Objects. So this is input fruit. Item is now an entire object. So we need to reference the keys. Okay. So theoretically, I don't need these. These are creating a level of abstraction that we don't want. That looks to be better formatted. So let's see if we can't access addspace.image. Okay, that looks correct. So out of curiosity, let's try this in two ways. Let's try page.addspace.image and see if we can get that without define our data twice, which would be pretty annoying. So we don't need that, I don't think. Double check. Looking good. And let's see, we've got headline description, link text, link URL. All right, so it'll be very similar to this, and we will put in that, but instead of image, it'll be headline. We'll actually add an alt tag that is promo image for headline. Description will become all this in description. The anchor will be all that, and what do we call it? We called it link URL and link text. So link URL, and this will be all that link text. Looks like that worked. So we can remove our debug there. Get rid of the extra spacing that we've got. And so yeah, that links to the home page. So we'll want this to go to probably the Code Contemporary site, where it can pop that up here to sign up. And we can specify that up here. So this may seem like overkill for, oh man, do I not have HTTPS on Code Contemporary? That's problematic. No, there we go. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine, everyone. So yeah, it is now fully formatted. So let's go ahead and commit that. Let's see, status, everything, git commit, adds, include for add space, and first add. So theoretically, I also probably want to have some conditionals. Like we probably don't want a broken image if I don't have an image. I wonder what happens if we don't have a description. Let's see what works with this. Okay, it just goes away, and that's expected, but it leaves the actual element, which we don't want. So yeah, let's do some protective programming. Say if page.addSpace.description if, just copy that, change it out, headline never know when your future self is going to be idiotic in some way. And if same with our if page.add space image, have all this. And for the link, I'm just going to specify off of link URL, because if there's no URL, I don't want a broken button displaying. So if page.add space dot link URL, and we'll finish that over here with an end if. So now, if we don't have a description, yeah, I mean that's not like ideal, right? Like there's some spacing issues happening there because we have defined it in grid and things did collapse up, but it allows for some extra protection. I am kind of curious what will happen if we don't have an image. That's not how we comment that out. Yeah, see, it's not ideal. We'll want to have all this stuff, but at least we've protected ourselves a little bit for the entire ad space. If page.addSpace, I think that should be good enough. That way, if I do insert this on a page and then decide to remove it, I can just remove it from the front matter. So let's remove that from the front matter. Save that in and see what we get. No errors. Do we have an ad space on the page here? We do not. So we have protected ourselves against that eventuality at least. So yeah, that is me setting that up in Jekyll. I'll probably continue working on this and actually get it live today and take down those awful pop-ups. Downside to this method is going to be we've got to have a thing of front matter on every single blog post. I could potentially set a default, but I like to have a little more control. Like I'm working in a static site generator because I want that control. So yeah, I hope this week has been helpful. I would encourage you to hit me up on Twitter at BROB at Brob, and also visit brianlrobinson.com and codecontemporary.com. Both links are down below. And we'll do some more live streaming next week for any questions that you've got, and we'll also probably create some new features for either this site, or maybe we'll work on refresh to the actual Code Contemporary website. So I will see you next week, and until then, I hope you have a great weekend and are working on cool stuff.